The ruins stood silent beneath the midnight sky, their jagged stones draped in creeping ivy. A cold wind whispered through the skeletal remains of the once grand cathedral, carrying the scent of rain and something darker, something alive. Celine moved through the shadows with effortless grace, her black gown flowing like spilled ink against the broken marble floor. Her presence was a whisper against the night, a thing of delicate lethality. The scent of blood still clung to her lips, warm from her last hunt. Yet, as she paused near a fractured archway, an unsettling awareness prickled at her senses. She was being watched. Her golden eyes flicked toward the edge of the ruins. A presence loomed there, not human, not prey. It was something stronger, wilder. Then he stepped forward. Ronan. His form emerged from the darkness, tall and powerful, with the raw intensity of a storm waiting to break. The moonlight caught the sharp planes of his face, the tangle of dark hair, the feral glint in his eyes that burned gold. Unlike his kind, he wore no chains of civility, no pretense of restraint. He was everything the vampire courts whispered about, a beast in human skin. Celine should have turned away, should have vanished into the mist and left him to prowl alone. But she didn't. She met his gaze instead. For a moment, there was only silence, thick and humming with unspoken tension. Then Ronan moved, slow, deliberate. Not a charge, not a threat, but something far more dangerous. A hunt. Celine tilted her head, lips parting in a slow smirk. Lost? Wolf? Her voice was velvet, edged with amusement. You should not be here. Ronan's eyes flicked over her, his gaze lingering just long enough to make her pulse tighten, if she still had one. Neither should you. His voice was rough, deep, a sound that rumbled through the night like distant thunder. Celine took a step closer, her scent curling around him. Dark roses and death. She expected him to recoil, to bare his teeth and remind her what he was. Instead, he held his ground, watching her with something she couldn't quite decipher. Curiosity. No. Hunger. Not the mindless hunger of a beast, not the blind instinct that drove his kind to hunt hers. This was something else, something far more dangerous. I have no quarrel with you, Wolf, Celine murmured, trailing a fingertip along the curve of her collarbone. But if you think to make me your prey, you will be disappointed. Ronan's lips curled slightly, not a smile, but something close. I don't hunt without reason. Celine arched a brow. Then why are you here? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped even closer, his presence a tangible force in the air between them. She should have struck, should have used the razor-sharp speed of her kind to remind him of his place. But for the first time in centuries, she felt something unexpected. Anticipation. Ronan's voice dropped lower, almost like a growl. You already know. Celine's breath stilled. The words shouldn't have affected her. Not like this. Not when he was meant to be nothing more than a wild thing lurking in the night. But there was something about him. Something that made her feel like she was standing at the edge of a precipice, staring down into something deep, dark, and utterly inescapable. For the first time in a long, long time, she wanted to fall. The wind howled through the ruins, carrying the distant echo of something ancient, something dangerous. But neither of them moved. Neither of them looked away. The silence between them stretched, thick with something unseen, something primal. The wind stirred the ruins, rustling through Celine's long raven hair, but she did not move. Neither did he. Ronan stood before her like a force of nature, untamed and unshaken. His golden eyes never wavered, locked onto hers with an intensity that sent a whisper of something unfamiliar through her veins. It was not fear. No, she had long forgotten the taste of that. Curiosity. Intrigue. Something far more dangerous. Celine's lips curled, the slow smirk of a predator toying with her prey. You've come far to find me, she murmured, tilting her head. Tell me, do you always chase after things you cannot have? Ronan took a single step forward, deliberate and unhurried. I don't chase, he rumbled, his voice thick with something unreadable. I take. A flicker of amusement danced in Celine's golden gaze. Bold, reckless, foolish. Is that what you think? She mused, lifting a delicate hand, tracing a slow circle in the air as if drawing an invisible thread between them. That you can simply take me. She moved then, fast, too fast for human eyes. One moment she stood before him. The next, she was behind him, her voice a whisper against his ear. Try, Wolf. Ronan's pulse pounded, but not from surprise. He had expected her speed, had felt the air shift the moment she vanished. Instead of reacting with violence, he turned slowly, deliberate in his movements, forcing her to look at him, to see that she had not unsettled him. Celine watched him, searching, waiting for the moment he would falter. But he didn't. Fascinating. Ronan's lips quirked, his head tilting just slightly, as if seen through the careful layers she had wrapped around herself. You want me to, don't you? He murmured. A flicker, so brief it barely existed, crossed Celine's face. A reaction. That was all he needed. She moved to step away, but before she could vanish into the night, Ronan struck. Fast, brutal. One moment she was standing free, the next she was caught. His hand wrapped around her wrist, his body pressing her back against the cold stone wall. Not hard enough to hurt, but enough to remind her what he was. Power, strength, a storm waiting to break. Celine inhaled sharply, not from fear, but from something far more delicious. She could escape. She knew it, and so did he, but she didn't move. Ronan leaned in, his voice low, rough. You've spent centuries playing with your prey. Tell me, Celine. His breath was warm against her skin. How does it feel to be the one caught? A slow, deadly smile spread across her lips. Am I caught? She whispered. Then she twisted, using the very moment he breathed her in to break free. She didn't retreat. No, that was not her way. Instead, she switched their places in a blink, forcing him against the wall, her fingers curling around his throat. But Ronan laughed. Deep, rough, unshaken. Celine's grip tightened for the briefest second, her nails just barely pressing into his skin. He did not fight her. He let her hold him there, let her think she had control. And yet, his gaze told her otherwise. She was playing with fire, and she liked it. Celine leaned in, her lips just inches from his. You're not like the others, she whispered. His hand slid to her waist, pulling her against him, unyielding but measured. Neither are you. Their eyes met, gold against gold, predator against predator. The game had changed. Neither of them were running. Neither of them wanted to. The night stretched around them, full of promises that neither of them were ready to name. But one thing was certain. This was no longer a hunt. This was something else. Something dangerous. Something inevitable. The ruins stood in quiet witness to the storm between them. The night was cold, yet the space between Ronan and Celine burned with something untamed, something neither of them could name, but both could feel. She was still close, her fingers costing over his throat, a silent challenge in the way she held him. It was a game, a delicate war of wills, but one neither of them truly wanted to win. Ronan smirked, his golden eyes dark with hunger, not for blood, but for something deeper, something raw. Her. You like to think you're in control, he murmured, his voice thick with amusement. But tell me, Celine, what happens when you finally lose? Celine's lips parted, her sharp nails tracing the strong line of his jaw, as if testing the weight of his question. Lose. She had never lost a battle in her existence. She had danced through centuries, untouched, undefeated, unclaimed. But this was different. Ronan was different. She let her fingers linger for a moment too long, let her presence press against him like a whisper of midnight silk. You assume I fear the fall, she said, her voice like the wind, soft, chilling, and full of secrets. His smirk widened, his hands tightening on her waist, pulling her just a fraction closer. "No," he murmured. "I think you crave it." A sharp breath caught in her throat, but she masked it with a laugh. Low, rich, dangerously amused. "And you think you're the one to make me fall?" Ronan's grip flexed against her hips, his strength evident but controlled, like a predator who could strike, but was enjoying the anticipation too much. He leaned in, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "I don't think, Celine," he whispered. "I know." A shiver danced down her spine, a rare and forbidden sensation. She should have pushed him away. She should have vanished into the night, left him standing there in the ruins with nothing but the echo of her laughter. But she didn't. Instead, she stayed. And Ronan saw it. He saw her. His fingers skimmed along her arm, slow, deliberate, as if mapping the very essence of her being. His touch was firm, unapologetic, owning the space between them. Celine's fangs pressed lightly against her lower lip, a habit she hadn't indulged in for centuries. He was drawing something out of her, something that shouldn't exist between their kinds, between a predator and another predator. Desire. Not just the fleeting hunger she felt when she played with her prey, but something deeper, something rooted in the way he stood unbroken before her, the way he looked at her not as an enemy, not as a fragile thing to be possessed, but as something worthy of pursuit. The thought both thrilled and infuriated her. With a sudden shift, she pulled back, her golden eyes gleaming. "You're dangerous, Wolf." Ronan exhaled a laugh, running a hand through his thick hair, his sharp jawline catching the moonlight. "And you're not." Celine smirked. "Oh, I am." The wind howled between them, stirring her hair like a phantom's touch. A moment passed, thick with tension, before Ronan tilted his head, watching her with something unreadable in his gaze. Then, slowly, he stepped back. Just a little. He was giving her space. A choice. Celine should have turned and left. It would have been easier, safer. But the thought of walking away felt wrong. Instead, she lingered for a heartbeat longer than she should have. And Ronan noticed. His smirk deepened, something dark and knowing behind his gaze. "We're not done, vampire." Celine arched a brow. "You sound so sure." He took another step back, but his presence still filled the air. "Because I am." Celine didn't respond. She simply watched him, unreadable as ever. Then, with the grace of a shadow, she vanished into the night. But even as she fled, she knew. She wasn't running. She was waiting. For the next time. For him. And Ronan, he just smiled. Because he knew that when she finally stopped fighting, she wouldn't just fall. She would fall for him. The night was restless. Shadows stretched long beneath the full moon, shifting between the ruins where the scent of rain lingered in the air. Ronan stood at the edge of the forgotten world, his golden eyes burning through the darkness. She was close. He could feel her. Celine. The name alone curled through his mind like a whisper of midnight silk. It had been days since she vanished into the night, leaving nothing but the ghost of her presence behind. And yet he hadn't stopped thinking about her, hadn't stopped craving her. Now she was here. He didn't know how he knew. He just did. A flicker of movement in the distance, the rustle of fabric against the wind. Then she stepped into the moonlight. Celine moved with the grace of a phantom, her dark dress flowing like liquid shadow. Her golden eyes met his, sharp and unreadable, filled with the same dangerous pull that had haunted him since their last encounter. Ronan smirked, slow and knowing. "Took you long enough." Celine arched a delicate brow. "Were you waiting for me, Wolf?" He took a single step forward, the space between them charged with something raw, something inevitable. "You knew I would be." She let out a quiet laugh, soft but edged with something darker. Amusement, curiosity, temptation. "You're bold," she murmured, tilting her head, her long raven hair cascading over one shoulder. "Most men wouldn't dare wait for something like me." Ronan's smirk deepened. That's because most men are weak. Celine's gaze flickered, a brief glimmer of interest, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she moved, faster than breath, faster than thought. One moment she was standing before him, the next, she was at his side, her cold fingers skimming along the bare skin of his forearm, tracing the rough lines of muscle with a touch that sent a slow fire burning through his veins. "Are you weak, Ronan?" she whispered, her voice like the wind. Soft, chilling, dangerously close. His pulse thundered, but he didn't move, didn't pull away. He wouldn't. Instead, he let her play her game, let her brush her fingers up to his shoulder, across the hard plane of his chest, as if testing him. His golden eyes locked onto hers. "You already know the answer to that." Celine's lips curled, sharp as a blade. "Do I?" Before she could move again, before she could disappear into the night like she always did, Ronan struck. Fast, unyielding, his fingers wrapped around her wrist, firm but controlled, his body moving into hers until her back met the rough stone wall behind them. The ruins stood witness as he pinned her there, trapping her between the unyielding stone and the undeniable heat of him. Celine didn't struggle. She didn't need to. She simply smiled. Because he had caught her, yes, but she had let him. Ronan leaned in, his breath warm against her skin. "You think I don't know what you're doing," he murmured, his grip tightening just slightly, just enough to remind her that she wasn't the only predator here. Celine's golden gaze gleamed. "And what am I doing, Wolf?" Ronan smirked, his lips brushing dangerously close to her ear. "Running." Her breath hitched, just a fraction, just enough for him to feel it. Then, as quickly as he had caught her, he let go. Celine blinked, momentarily unguarded, before she caught herself. Ronan stepped back, his gaze never leaving hers. He could have kept her there, could have claimed whatever power struggle was happening between them. But he didn't, because he knew something she didn't. She wasn't the only one who could disappear into the night. And tonight, he would be the one leaving first. A slow, wicked smirk spread across his lips. "We're not done, Celine." Then, before she could respond, before she could even take a step, he was gone. Celine exhaled sharply, staring at the empty space where he had stood just moments before. And for the first time in centuries, she felt something unfamiliar. A hunger that had nothing to do with blood. She licked her lips, a slow, knowing smile curving at the edges. "Oh, Wolf," she murmured to the wind, "you have no idea what you've started." And this time, she was the one left waiting. The night was thick with the scent of rain and old earth, the air humming with an unseen tension. Ronan moved like a shadow through the ruined corridors of the abandoned castle, his steps silent, his breath steady. The full moon followed him through the shattered archways, its silver glow casting jagged shapes across the stone floor. He knew she was here. Celine. Her name had burned in his mind since the last time they met, since the moment he had let her go. A foolish mistake. She was a vampire, a creature of blood and secrets, but more than that, she was his weakness, and he would not let her slip away again. A whisper of movement. He stilled. She was behind him, watching, waiting. Ronan turned, slow and deliberate, his golden eyes catching the faint shimmer of her silhouette in the shadows. "You took your time," she murmured, her voice as smooth as dark velvet. His lips curled. "I wanted to see if you'd come to me first." Celine stepped forward, emerging from the darkness like a phantom of the night. Ethereal, unfathomably beautiful, dangerously still. The moonlight kissed her pale skin, making her seem almost unreal, almost untouchable. Almost. "You think I would chase you, Wolf?" she asked, arching a delicate brow. Ronan took a slow step forward, his presence thick, his heat unmistakable. "I think," he said, his voice rough, "that you've been thinking about me as much as I've been thinking about you." A flicker of amusement crossed her golden eyes. "Arrogant." "Honest," he countered. Celine tilted her head, studying him. She wasn't used to this, to being hunted. She was the predator, always the one who held control. But Ronan, he wasn't like the men who feared her. He wasn't afraid of her at all. "Tell me, Ronan," she said, stepping closer, the space between them tightening, charged with something unspoken, something ancient. "What do you truly want from me?" His gaze darkened, his jaw tightening. He knew what he wanted. Her. Every piece of her. The fire and the ice. The danger and the beauty. The problem was, he didn't know if wanting her would destroy him, or if it was already too late. "You already know," he said, his voice low, rough with something that felt too much like need. Celine smiled, slow, knowing, wicked. "Do I?" Her fingers brushed against his chest, a touch so faint it was almost a whisper, but it was enough. Enough to make his muscles tense, his blood burn beneath his skin. Ronan's hand shot up, catching her wrist, pulling her closer. The shift was sudden. The air between them charged. Celine didn't resist. She wanted this. She wanted to test him, to see if he would break first, if he would submit. But Ronan wasn't the kind of man who surrendered. His grip tightened just slightly, just enough to remind her that she wasn't the only one who played this game. He was the hunter too, and now she was caught. "You're toying with something dangerous, vampire," he murmured against her ear, his breath warm, his presence all-consuming. Celine's lips curved, unfazed. "So are you." Ronan chuckled, low and dark. "Then tell me to let go." Silence. Celine's pulse, if she had one, would have quickened. But she didn't tell him to stop. She didn't pull away. Because this fire between them, was impossible to ignore. Finally, after a long, tense beat, she whispered, "You won't." And she was right. Because Ronan wasn't letting go. Not now. Not ever. The wind howled through the ruins, a ghostly symphony of whispers and forgotten time. The night stretched long and endless, heavy with unspoken words. But between them, between Ronan and Celine, silence was its own kind of war. She was still in his grip, her wrist caught in his strong hold, her body close enough to steal his warmth, yet not close enough to surrender to it. Her golden eyes gleamed, unreadable, daring. She should have pulled away. She should have laughed and vanished into the night like she always did. But she didn't. Instead, she stayed. "Is this what you wanted, Wolf?" Celine murmured, her voice soft, but edged with something sharper. "To trap me?" Ronan's lips curled, his golden gaze dark with something primal. "You don't feel trapped." She tilted her head, her raven hair spilling over her shoulder. "No," she admitted, her voice a silken confession. "I don't." And that was the problem. She should have felt hunted. She should have resented the way he looked at her, the way he challenged her in a way no man ever had. But the heat of his skin, the way his fingers flexed against her wrist, firm yet not cruel, it was intoxicating, dangerous. Celine smiled then, slow, deliberate. She twisted her wrist, moving with unnatural grace, slipping from his hold in a way that no human woman ever could. 1 second she was in his grasp, the next, she was behind him, her cool fingers brushing over the back of his neck, light as a breath. Ronan's jaw tightened. She was playing with him. "I let you catch me," she whispered, her voice carrying through the night. Ronan turned, fast, his hand shooting out again, but she was faster. Celine darted back, laughing softly, tauntingly, her movements fluid, teasing. She was toying with him, pulling him into her game, daring him to chase her. And Ronan, he would. With a low growl he lunged, this time, faster, stronger. Celine gasped as his arms wrapped around her, dragging her against him in one swift motion. The game was over. She blinked, just for a second, caught off guard by the sheer force of him. His strength was like fire, undeniable, overwhelming, impossible to ignore. His breath was warm against her temple, his grip unyielding. his heart a steady, powerful rhythm against her body. Celine could have escaped. She could have vanished again. But she didn't. Instead, she stilled. Ronan exhaled a quiet laugh, low and knowing. Not so fast this time. Are you? Celine's lips curved, but her golden gaze remained locked onto his. I let you catch me, she repeated, but the words held less certainty this time. Ronan's fingers brushed along the curve of her spine. A silent warning. A silent promise. No, he murmured, his voice deep, rough, possessive. You didn't. Celine swallowed. He was right. For the first time in centuries, she wasn't the one in control. And somehow, she didn't want to be. The air between them grew thick, charged with something unspoken, something dangerous. Ronan could feel it, the way her body pressed against his, the way she hadn't pulled away. His golden eyes burned into hers. Tell me to let go, he whispered. Celine parted her lips, but no words came, because she couldn't say it. Not when she had never felt more alive than in this moment. Not when, for the first time, she wasn't sure if she wanted to escape. Ronan saw it, the flicker of hesitation, the war behind her golden eyes. And in that moment, he knew. She was falling. She just wasn't ready to admit it yet. So he did something unexpected. He let go. Celine inhaled sharply as his warmth left her, as the space between them stretched into something unbearable. Ronan took a step back, his smirk lazy, dangerous, waiting. Celine should have vanished. She should have taken her chance to leave. But instead, she stayed. Ronan's smirk widened. We're not done, vampire. Celine exhaled, something dark and thrilling curling in her chest. She knew. Neither of them were done. Not even close. The night pressed in around them, thick with mist, the scent of rain laced with something darker, something forbidden. Ronan stood still, his golden eyes locked onto Celine's as if daring her to run. But she didn't. She stayed. She should have disappeared into the shadows, like smoke vanishing into the wind. She should have laughed at him, mocked his foolishness, reminded him that she was untouchable. But she wasn't. Not with him. Celine's fingers twitched at her sides. She had spent centuries mastering control, reining in her hunger, her desires, her weakness. But with him, control was slipping. Ronan took a slow step forward, his presence overwhelming, raw power rolling off him in waves. You're afraid, he said, his voice low, edged with something dark. Celine's lips parted, but no words came. Was she afraid? No, not of him, but of what she felt when he looked at her like that. Like he saw her, not just the vampire, not just the predator, but the woman beneath. You're wrong, she murmured. Ronan's smirk was slow, knowing. Am I? The distance between them disappeared. He reached out, tracing the edge of her jaw with his fingers, the touch rough, warm, alive. The contrast between them burned. Fire and ice. Celine should have recoiled, should have reminded him that she was dangerous, deadly. But instead, she tilted her head, letting his touch linger, letting herself feel. She had forgotten what that was like. You're playing with fire, wolf, she whispered, though her voice lacked the warning it should have held. Ronan's hand slid lower, trailing down the delicate column of her throat, feeling the coolness of her skin, the place where a heartbeat should have been. But she was nothing like the fragile creatures he had known before. She was a storm, a force of nature, and he wanted to be caught in her chaos. You think I'm afraid of a little fire, he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. Celine inhaled sharply. He was too close, and she wasn't stopping him. A slow, wicked smile curved his lips as if he could hear her unspoken thoughts. Tell me to stop, he whispered. Celine knew she should. She knew that if she let this happen, if she let him unravel her any further, there would be no going back. But she had spent centuries in the dark, untouched, untamed. And now she was standing in the fire. She lifted her gaze to his, her golden eyes burning, her lips parting as if to say the words. But they never came. Because in that moment, the wind howled through the ruins, carrying with it the scent of something else. Something dangerous. Something hungry. Ronan stiffened, his golden eyes snapping to the shadows beyond them. Celine felt it too, the shift in the air, the presence of something watching. And then a snarl. Low, guttural. Not Ronan's. Celine turned just as a pair of glowing red eyes emerged from the darkness. Another werewolf. Not one of his. Ronan's muscles tensed, his entire frame coiled like a beast ready to strike. His dominance rolled through the air like a warning, his expression dark, feral. Celine exhaled, stepping closer to him, her voice dangerously soft. It seems you've been followed. Ronan didn't take his eyes off the creature in the dark. It seems we both have. A cold smile played at Celine's lips. Then let's show them why that was a mistake. The other werewolf lunged, and the night erupted into chaos. The night shattered like glass. Ronan moved first, fast, deadly. His muscles coiled as he lunged, meeting the rogue werewolf midair with a force that shook the ground. The impact sent both of them crashing through the ruins, stone crumbling beneath their weight. Celine didn't flinch. She stood still, a vision of ice and shadow, her golden eyes locked onto the chaos before her. Two beasts clashed under the moon, raw power colliding in a savage dance. Ronan was all muscle and fury, his strikes relentless, his dominance unmistakable. But the other wolf was strong. Too strong. Celine narrowed her eyes. This wasn't an ordinary werewolf. The air smelled of something foul, magic, dark and unnatural. The rogue slashed at Ronan's side, claws slicing deep, and for the first time, Celine felt something strange. Panic. It was foreign, unwelcome. She had seen 1,000 battles, watched 1,000 men bleed. But this was different, because it was him. And she wasn't ready to lose him. With a blur of motion, she was gone, a shadow streaking through the ruins. The rogue barely had time to register the movement before she was upon him, her fingers curling under his jaw in a grip of iron. The werewolf snarled, but Celine was stronger. Her golden eyes glowed as she leaned in, her voice a whisper of death. You should have stayed in the dark. And then she struck. Her fangs pierced his throat, quick, precise, final. The rogue let out a strangled sound, his body shuddering once, and then nothing. Celine pulled back, licking the last drop of blood from her lips as she let the lifeless body drop to the earth. Silence. Then a low, ragged chuckle. Ronan. She turned, only to find him watching her with something dark in his golden eyes. Something dangerous. Celine tilted her head. What? He didn't answer. Not at first. He simply moved. In an instant, she was the one pinned, against cold stone, against him. His hands gripped her wrists, his body flush against hers, heat and hunger rolling off him like a storm. Celine's breath hitched. Ronan, you saved me. His voice was rough, low, his breath hot against her throat. Celine smirked. Don't look so surprised. He exhaled a laugh, but his grip didn't loosen. If anything, it tightened. You're supposed to be the one who doesn't care. She arched a brow. And yet, here we are. The space between them was nothing. Not air, not logic, nothing. His golden eyes burned into hers, searching, demanding. And for once, Celine had no answer. Because he was right. She wasn't supposed to care. She was supposed to be untouchable, cold as death itself. But he made her feel alive. And that was the real danger. Ronan leaned in, his lips just barely grazing her ear. Tell me to stop. Celine's fingers curled against his chest. She could. She could end this now, push him away. Pretend this was nothing but a moment of madness. But when her lips parted, the words wouldn't come. Ronan pulled back just enough to meet her gaze, waiting, watching. The silence stretched, thick with something undeniable. And then, Celine made her choice. She closed the distance. Her lips found his, a kiss that was neither gentle nor patient, but raw, desperate, inevitable. The taste of blood and moonlight, of war and surrender, of something neither of them could escape anymore. Ronan growled, deep and possessive, as he took what she gave. And Celine, for the first time in centuries, she let herself fall.